I never expected a single favor to change the rhythm of my life, but it started the afternoon Daniel came over. He was my closest friend's son, 23, polite, soft-spoken, the kind of young man people trusted instantly. He had grown up around us, visiting on weekends, helping with errands, disappearing for years, then returning with that same quiet smile. He'd always treated me with a sort of respectful admiration, something I never paid much attention to, until that day. My husband was at work, buried in deadlines, barely answering my messages. Daniel had come by to drop off something for his mother, but the moment he stepped inside, I sensed he wanted more than a quick handover. He lingered near the doorway, shifting his weight, eyes avoiding mine like he was carrying something heavy he didn't know how to place. When I asked if everything was all right, he exhaled, almost relieved, and said he needed a small favor, a wish he called it, something he'd been holding on to for a long time but never had the courage to voice. I thought he meant advice or maybe a job reference. He sat across from me on the couch, fingers tapping his knee, voice low but steady as he admitted he'd always felt a strange pull toward me, one he'd tried to ignore out of respect, age, boundaries, all the things that should have stopped him. But he said watching me over the years, seeing how alone I looked even when my husband was beside me, made him want to give me something he believed I deserved. Attention, presence, the feeling of being seen. I didn't interrupt. I should have. A married woman with a distracted spouse and a young man confessing feelings. Every warning sign was there. But the truth was, his words hit a part of me I'd been pretending didn't exist. The part that had grown tired of eating dinners alone. The part that had forgotten what it felt like to be admired without conditions. The part that had slowly accepted that in my own home, I had become invisible. Daniel wasn't asking for anything physical. He made that clear. He only asked if I would give him one honest moment, just the two of us, where he could tell me everything he'd wanted to say without guilt or interruption. A moment he said he would remember even if nothing else ever happened. I should have said no. I should have told him it was inappropriate, that he was too young, that I was committed to a marriage regardless of how hollow it felt. But when he looked at me, really looked, with eyes that weren't tired or distracted or half somewhere else like my husband's always were, something inside me softened. I realized how long it had been since someone waited for my answer like it mattered. I didn't give him a speech. I didn't think it through. I simply nodded, one small, quiet yes that carried far more weight than either of us understood in that moment. And the second I said it, his posture changed. Not in a bold, triumphant way, but in a gentle one, like he'd been holding his breath for years and finally let it go. That yes was supposed to be harmless. It wasn't. After giving that quiet yes, I expected the moment to pass. Maybe a heartfelt conversation. Maybe an awkward pause followed by a polite goodbye. But the atmosphere shifted in a way I didn't anticipate. It wasn't heavy or forbidden. It was calm, almost too calm, like both of us were stepping into a truth we had avoided naming. Daniel didn't move closer right away. He didn't take advantage of the vulnerability hanging between us. Instead, he lowered his voice, almost whispering as he said he didn't want to complicate my life. He wasn't trying to replace anyone, wasn't trying to disrupt my marriage or my loyalty. He only wanted honesty, mine and his. He told me he'd watched me shrink over the years. He noticed how I smiled less, how I spoke softer, how I hesitated before answering questions as if expecting my words to be dismissed. He remembered the evenings he used to visit when he was younger, the warmth I carried, the way I laughed without checking whether it was appropriate or too loud or inconvenient. He said that woman seemed to disappear piece by piece, and he hated seeing it happen. I didn't realize someone outside my marriage had seen it so clearly. My husband certainly hadn't. To him, I was steady, reliable, always fine. Daniel wasn't accusing, wasn't telling me what I lacked. He was telling me what I'd lost. Pieces of myself I didn't even know had slipped away. I didn't say much. I didn't know what to say. Hearing someone articulate the things I'd kept buried felt exposing. Like standing in front of a mirror for the first time in years and noticing how different you've become. I wanted to defend myself, to explain that life had grown busy, that routine had replaced warmth, that I wasn't unhappy. I was just surviving. But the words felt weak, and he didn't push me to say them. Instead, he asked a question so simple and disarming that it unsettled me. When was the last time someone asked what you wanted? Not what I needed, not what I could manage, not what made sense, but what I truly wanted. The truth hit me harder than I expected. I couldn't remember. I had been answering everyone else's needs for so long. My husband, my job, my friends, that my own desires felt like a luxury I wasn't allowed to acknowledge. He wasn't asking me to want him. He wasn't even asking for reciprocation. He only wanted me to feel free enough to admit something honest, without fear of being judged or dismissed. That sincerity alone disarmed every defense I had. My phone buzzed on the table. My husband. A short message asking if I could pay a bill he forgot about. No greeting, no check-in, no "how are you?" The contrast between the two men was jarring. One barely noticed me unless something needed solving. The other was sitting across from me, studying the way my fingers hesitated before picking up the phone. Recognizing the sadness I tried to hide, I set the phone face down. Daniel didn't smile triumphantly. He didn't lean in. He simply said, "You deserve more than being an afterthought." The softness in his tone made my chest ache in a way I wasn't prepared for. I felt seen in a place I had convinced myself no one would ever look again. And maybe that was the moment things quietly crossed a line, not through touch or action but through recognition. Through the simple, dangerous realization that someone who wasn't my husband understood me more deeply than the man I shared a home with. That kind of understanding is its own form of intimacy, the kind that doesn't need permission to change everything. I didn't ask Daniel to leave. And he didn't offer to go. The silence between us didn't feel empty anymore. It felt charged with things neither of us had dared to express before. Daniel shifted slightly, not closer, not bolder. Just enough to show he wasn't running from what we'd stepped into. I could feel his attention on me, not in a possessive way, but in that rare, careful way you only see from someone who has thought about their words long before speaking them. He asked if he'd crossed a line by being so honest. I told him the truth. The only line crossed was the one I had drawn around myself, the one that said I was fine living half-noticed. He didn't respond right away, but the relief in his eyes said enough. He wasn't relieved because he thought he had a chance with me. He was relieved because he hadn't hurt me by telling the truth. For a moment, neither of us moved. The air felt warm, steady, almost protective. He studied my expression with a softness that made me uneasy. Not because it was wrong, but because I wasn't used to being looked at like that. My husband used to look at me with curiosity, with interest, with effort. But that had faded long ago into hurried mornings and distracted evenings. Somewhere along the way, being appreciated had become something I remembered, not something I lived. Daniel's voice broke the silence again, low and earnest. He said he wasn't asking for anything from me, not a promise, not a commitment, not even a confession. He only wanted me to understand that I was still someone worth wanting, someone worth choosing, someone who didn't need to settle for being tolerated. His words weren't rehearsed. They were raw in a way that made them impossible to ignore. A knot tightened in my chest. I didn't want to admit how deeply his honesty affected me. I didn't want him to know how long it had been since anyone spoke to me with that kind of clarity. But he could see it anyway. Not because I said anything, but because the truth has a way of revealing itself without a single word. He reached out, not to touch me, but to place his hand on the cushion between us, palm up, an unspoken offer rather than an invitation. It was such a small gesture, but it carried a weight I felt immediately. He wasn't asking for something forbidden. He was giving me the choice I never realized I'd been craving. The choice to be acknowledged, to be valued, to be seen. My fingers hovered for a moment. I hesitated, not because I didn't know what I wanted, but because wanting anything for myself felt like stepping into unfamiliar territory. Choosing myself felt dangerous. But not choosing myself felt even worse. I didn't take his hand. I didn't need to. The fact that I considered it was already enough to shift everything inside me. He saw the hesitation, saw the conflict, and didn't push. Instead, he told me that whatever happened next or didn't, he would never hold it against me. He respected me too much to turn his feelings into pressure. That alone made my breath catch. Respect is such a simple thing, yet somehow the one thing I had gone without for too long. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again. Another message from my husband. This time it was just a single line asking if I'd remembered dinner. No curiosity about where I was. No thought that I might be out, occupied, or simply exhausted. Just an expectation that I didn't answer it. The shift inside me wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, slow but certain. A realization forming with every breath. Sometimes betrayal doesn't begin with touch. Sometimes it begins the moment someone else makes you feel more alive than the person you promised your life to. Daniel didn't say another word, he didn't have to. The moment stretched between us in a way that felt almost fragile, as if one wrong word could shatter whatever we had quietly built in that afternoon. Daniel wasn't watching me with expectation. He was watching me with understanding, the kind that doesn't demand an outcome. I could feel the weight of everything unspoken pressing on us. My marriage, his feelings, the silence in my home, the truth I tried to ignore for years. I finally told him something I had never admitted to anyone, not even myself. I said I didn't recognize my life anymore, that I had become someone who kept going out of habit, not purpose. Someone who answered messages out of obligation, not connection. Someone who had stopped asking for more because I didn't believe I deserved it. The words came out trembling, stripped of excuses, carrying the exhaustion I'd been swallowing for years. Daniel listened without interrupting. His expression softened in a way that wasn't pity, but empathy, real quiet empathy. He told me that wanting more wasn't selfish, that settling wasn't noble, that I had spent so long supporting everyone else that I'd forgotten I was allowed to be supported too. I realized then why his presence felt so different. It wasn't about desire. It was about attention, presence, care. The things that evaporate slowly in a marriage until you wake up one day and realize you're living beside someone who knows your schedule, but not your heart. I admitted to him that I didn't know what any of this meant. Not for today, not for tomorrow, not for my marriage. I wasn't prepared to make decisions. I wasn't prepared to rewrite my life. I only knew one thing with clarity, that this afternoon had shown me a mirror I couldn't unsee. Someone had looked at me and seen value I had forgotten existed. Someone had made me confront how empty I had allowed myself to become. Daniel nodded, as if he expected nothing more. He said he hadn't come for answers. He didn't want promises or complications. He only wanted me to stop shrinking, to stop disappearing, to remember that I was still someone whose presence mattered. He told me I didn't owe him anything, not a confession, not a choice, not a future. He said the only thing he wanted was for me to stop living like I was undeserving of being noticed. When he stood up to leave, he hesitated at the doorway, not for himself but for me. He asked one last question, soft and steady. Do you regret saying yes? The question hit deeper than he probably realized. I thought about my life, my loneliness, the quiet spaces in my marriage, the way I had learned to lower my expectations until there was barely anything left to hope for it. I told him no. I didn't regret it. Not because I knew where things would go, they might go nowhere, but because it was the first time in years I hadn't felt invisible. He nodded once, and something in his expression eased. He left without looking back, not out of coldness but out of respect, for me, for the moment, for the line we both knew existed even if we had stepped dangerously close to it. When the door closed, the silence in the house felt different. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't empty. It was honest. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what I felt. I wasn't even ashamed. I just knew I stood at the edge of a truth I could no longer ignore. It didn't matter whether anything ever happened again. What mattered was that someone saw me. And once you've been seen, you can't go back to living like you're invisible.